I think meeting and then marrying Dennis gave her, if you like, a freedom of not having to worry about where the next pound or £5 or £10 was going to come from. She always said that Dennis was her rock, and she meant it. It wasn't just a nice thing to say. Dennis was always there for her. He was pretty well off. He'd had his own company, and that was bought up later by an oil company, so there was no shortage of cash. And what Margaret needed, particularly in the furtherance of her political career, Margaret got.
I think whatever the job you're doing, you will have some worries. And if you just brood on them alone, they get much worse. You've got to have someone to talk to about them and someone to shake you out of yourself. And I'm just lucky in having it.
Your husband, of course, Mr. Thatcher, has been...
Oh, he's terrific. He's terrific.
Right.
If there's any tension in the air, he can always say, take the tension out immediately. I think we ought to think about summer holidays, dear.
Yeah.
When we can go.
Some hopes.
Have you got yours?
Some hopes.
Well, if we have an election early, we can go on holiday in August.
Yeah.
If we have an election late...
We won't go at all.
No holiday. That's right.
Well, I'll believe that when I see it.
Mr. Thatcher, are you happy with the prospect of another few years' residence in Downing Street, perhaps?
Reasonably.
Oh, come on, sure. That's his typical understatement. He'd be just as concerned as
Obvious.
as I should be.
Yes, of course.
She did have a wonderful quality which she sustained throughout her life, which was that of fearlessness. She was never frightened. She was a formidable character right from the beginning. She also had good looks and charm, and she wasn't frightened to use both of those.
Yes, there were obviously times when she could smile very sweetly and flutter her eyelids a little bit. But as she became more powerful, I think she realized more and more that it did her absolutely no harm when she needed to make the men realize that she was a perfectly attractive woman, and that if it meant being nice to them and lowering her voice a little, yes, she would do it. Towards the end of her time, she used to do it fairly outrageously. It was not for nothing that President Mitterrand of France said that she had the eyes of Caligula but the mouth of Marilyn Monroe. He'd spotted it, and plenty of others had spotted it too.
I've always said, I think she had sex appeal, frankly. She had something about her, and you could see why. She could dominate a room full of men, her ministers around her. Immediately, power, it was just there straight away. Yes, she wanted her own way a lot, but there was something about her. She was riveting personality.
The early 70s and Ted Heath's 4 years as Prime Minister were a disaster, because throughout the feeling was we're going to show the miners, and this was the first miners' strike, we're going to show them and the trade unions generally who's boss. So they'd passed some very tough union legislation, and then really on the back of that came the miners' strike. And in the end, of course, Ted Heath was not able to show them who was boss. Particularly the country turned against them because it resulted in the 3-day week. It resulted in, the lights going out all over the country at certain times. And so she began to attract around her from a fairly early stage people who were of that right-wing persuasion within the Tory party, who after what they saw as the totally disastrous Ted Heath years, they began to see in her that here was someone who was about as far from Ted Heath as you could get. And if they were going to swing the Tory party back to the right, or back to a rightwards direction, if you like, she might well be their woman.
The first time I was really aware of Margaret Thatcher was when she was a very determined Minister for Education. and had quite a few dealings with her. And I met one of her very senior civil servants years afterwards who told me that it was quite clear to him that Margaret Thatcher wasn't content to be an education minister. She had great ambition.
Intend to set up a small committee to inquire into the teaching of reading in schools and the use of the English language. I hope that this inquiry will show whether sufficient priority is being given to these matters and whether the most effective teaching methods are being used.
So she was beginning to be a bit of a magnet for those on the right of the party who were looking for someone, as it were, to save the Tory party from itself. And it was only when finally she decided that the Conservative Party was going in the wrong direction and that she was going to be the only one, because she looked around and she couldn't see anybody else, she was going to be the only one who could lead to a correction of the ways and to stop them all being so soft, that she decided to go for it. And that was the point, I think, where she stopped being an ordinary person and started being an extraordinary person.
A bare 90 minutes after her election as leader of the Conservatives, Mrs. Thatcher arrived by sports car at Central Office, the party headquarters.
We now think of Margaret Thatcher as being something of a right-wing figure, but she wasn't a far right-wing figure at all, especially not in the early days. And when she became leader of the Conservative Party in her first administration, was not a far-right administration at all. And she was somebody who was quite happy and ready to compromise. She was a conciliatory person. She was a very adept politician, but she gave the impression of leadership. She led from the front. She appeared to be strident and clear, while at the same time, when she needed to, compromising, trimming, moderating her views. So she had the style of a leader, but the acumen of a politician.
Mrs. Thatcher, the morning after your election, how do you feel about it now?
Perfectly all right. Perfectly all right. There's so much to be done that one hasn't time to feel too many butterflies.
Are you a little apprehensive about this new job?
Of course. Everyone is starting a new job.
How has the family reacted to it?
Oh, they're all right. They're taking it all in their stride. So whatever comes, they take it.
When Margaret Thatcher did become leader of the party, I think they were taken very much by surprise. In fact, I remember that Lord Amory, who is a former Chancellor of the Exchequer, wrote a letter to my aunt saying, should I be a bit scared of our new leader? But I think probably a lot of people thought that. What were they in for?
You have to remember that the leader who she replaced, Ted Heath, had become very, very unpopular. So there was great relief, I think, on the one side. But the other side, there was a feeling of, what have we done? Because she was pretty unknown. She had a lot of things about her that people didn't take to. She had a rather strange voice, for one thing, really sort of not an upper-class voice. She had come from rather humble origins, in fact. But she had that sort of voice, a bit like a mistress in a school. She talked to everybody as if they were children.
Well, how many hours would one have to do to get a license on that thing which I was on?
On the Abbots?
Yes.
You're probably about 16, 17 hours.
16, 17 hours?
Some of the politicians probably were furious that this woman was ordering them about, and others, of course, who were great supporters of hers and who were very aware of her capacity and her ability and things, were very keen to support her. So I think it was always quite difficult.
As soon as she was elected the leader of her party, she sought every possible opportunity to get out there, to go and meet the people, and quite shamelessly, photo opportunities were organised, and I covered quite a lot of them. And she was determined that that way the people would get to know the sort of person she was.
Having been here now for 2 days, seeing the British forces in Germany, do you still think that Britain's defences are inadequate?
I think I made my position very clear on Monday night. I said that I thought we'd already suffered enough cuts, that it's a government's job to see that the defence of the realm has a proper priority, and that we must carry out our duties both to our own people and to our allies in the Atlantic Alliance.
I think the press treated her rather lightly in the beginning. They called her Maggie all the time. A bit difficult to think of her as Maggie now. Then, of course, they the expression that was used by a Russian leader of her became very popular, the Iron Lady. I'm sure she approved of that one much, much more.
Well, the Russians have apparently protested at the anti-Soviet tone of your speech. Do you still think that speech was well advised?
Oh, very well advised. What the speech did was to take the facts and make the facts tell a story. I must have hit the right nail on the head pretty hard to get that sort of response.
The Iron Lady of the Western World came about in a very curious way. She'd spoken in the House of Commons about the need to resist the advances still of the Soviet Union. And it was picked up by an army newspaper in Moscow called the Red Star, and they dubbed her the Iron Lady of the Western World. And she was then asked about this at a dinner, which she gave not long afterwards. And she was dressed up to the nines. She could put on the finery if she wanted to. And so she thought at the start it was rather a joke.
I stand before you tonight in my Red Star chiffon evening gown. My face softly made up and my fair hair gently waved. The Iron Lady of the Western World. A Cold War warrior, an Amazon Philistine, even a Peking plotter. Yes, if that's how they wish to interpret my defense of values and freedoms fundamental to our way of life. And by they, I mean that somewhat strange alliance between the comrades of the Russian Defense Ministry and our own Defense Minister. They're welcome to call me what they like if they believe that we should ignore the build-up of Russian military strength.